Welcome to the fourth in our series of Holy Week studies. I'm continuing with reading from Luke chapter 20. Remember that yesterday the study was about traders being driven out from the temple. So after his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, Jesus starts to shake things up a bit, and perhaps the leaders start to wonder how on earth they can get rid of this troublemaker. So one of the ways they do that is to question his authority. Jesus' authority is questioned. On one of the days, as Jesus was instructing the people in the temple and preaching the good news, the chief priests and the scribes, along with the elders, confronted him and said to him, "Tell us, by what kind of authority you are doing these things? Or who is the one who gave you this authority?" Jesus replied, "I will also ask you a question. You tell me, the baptism of John the Baptist, was it from heaven, that is, ordained by God, or from men?" They discussed and debated it among themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why did you not believe him?' But if we say from men, all the people will stone us to death, for they are firmly convinced that John was a prophet." So they replied that they did not know from where it came. Then Jesus said to them, "Nor am I telling you by what kind of authority I do these things." So Jesus' authority was being questioned. Who was he operating under? He'd already said that he only said the words his father told him to say and did the things his father told him to do. And it's evident from not just the disciples but from the crowds that people knew who he was. He was the Messiah. They believed he was the Son of God. And perhaps this is what the Pharisees and the leaders were wanting him to say. They were wanting him to say that his authority was from God so that they could say that he was blaspheming. Because in their eyes, to be so big-headed and so presumptive as to say that you were operating under God's authority and not man's authority, that would have been blasphemy in their eyes. So they were trying to trip him up. But interestingly enough, they had already claimed that Jesus was working by the power of the devil. And they actually blasphemed the work of the Holy Spirit themselves when they said that, because real blasphemy is to attribute to the devil something that is from God, or vice versa. So they wanted to know whose authority was he operating under. In the time of Jesus, there were two types of rabbi. There was a rabbi without authority, and there was a rabbi with authority. Most rabbis were rabbis without authority. That means that they were only allowed to teach the exact teachings of their teacher. They weren't allowed to diverge from that in any way. But once in every couple of generations would appear a rabbi without authority. Sorry, that's the wrong way around. A rabbi with authority. And that rabbi with authority was able to teach his own revelation from God. And so what they were asking him was, whose authority are you teaching under? You know, who's your teacher? Who are you quoting? Because they didn't want to allow him to continue in the way he was going without questioning him and making him either blaspheme in their eyes or admit that he didn't have authority to speak the way he was doing it, because nobody had given him that. So Jesus was in a trap. But by questioning them back, he revealed their tactics to them and showed them that he knew exactly what they were up to. They couldn't get any further with him at that point. The question arises from this really is how it applies to us. And how do we see our authority under Jesus? And whose authority do we do things under? Are we looking for the approval of man, or are we looking for the approval of God? There's a saying that goes something like, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies those he calls. And so, yes, we might want to get a diploma, but are we wanting to achieve man's qualifications, or are we wanting to do what the Holy Spirit is leading us to do? Who is our head? It's Jesus. Who are we operating under? Jesus. What are we operating in? The kingdom. So it's not about church or governance or Bible school. It's about real authority under God to do those things that he calls us to do. And I'm not talking about doing whatever we want to do. I'm talking about, as Jesus did, being about his Father's business. If we know that our Father is God, we have the authority to do the things that he asks us to do. And that's the only qualification we need. So, as I'm reading that passage in Luke, I'm thinking about another rabbi and another Pharisee, actually, and that was Paul, who was known as Saul. And he was probably the most qualified person of his generation to be a teacher. But once he met Jesus, he went away for many years and hid in Arabia and studied the Old Testament with new eyes and gained his own revelation from the Lord. And that was what gave him authority to teach, not his previous education, but his revelation from God as he read through the scriptures and saw Jesus and the whole of the gospel woven through the Old Testament, which is all he would have had at that time. And so here he is writing to the church in Rome. And he's talking to them about how they are dedicated for service to God and encouraging them to look at their gifts that they have and how to use them. So reading from Romans chapter 12 verse 6. Since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given us, each of us is to use them accordingly. If someone has the gift of prophecy, let him speak a new message from God to his people in proportion to the faith he possesses. If service, in the act of serving, or he who teaches, in the act of teaching, or he who encourages, in the act of encouragement, he who gives with generosity, he who leads with diligence, he who shows mercy in caring for others with cheerfulness. So Paul is saying, what's the gift that you've got? Use it. And a couple of weeks back on the well, I actually wrote along these lines, and I'm just going to read my little comment there before I finish. What is your gifting? If you believe you have a particular gift or calling, as the advert says, just do it. Do you need a diploma, or do you need to be led by the Spirit in faith? Yes, we may need training. I'm currently undergoing quite an intensive scheme of Bible study because I know that I need to study the Word, and good teaching is not something I'm going to throw away. but God gives the best on-the-job training or apprenticeships out there. Just look at Moses or David. As I mentioned before, Paul was extremely well educated, but his ministry only began after he took himself away to review his learning after meeting Jesus, because he had a lot of indoctrination to undo. A Bible college will teach you the facts, but God's training ground gives you life experience, testimony, and empowerment through those spiritual gifts. So I just finish with saying, don't wait for man's approval. Seek God's approval. What have you got to offer? Use it.